Hey everyone, welcome to our first video for our first session on the question, is God trustworthy? In this video, we'll be asking two questions. What is trust and when should we do it? Now, I've done a fair bit of research on these topics, but what I'll be presenting today are my own ideas, and so there's no guarantee that they're right. Please feel free to ask questions and take issue with something in our discussion after the video. It's actually a lot easier to start with the second question of when should we trust, because we're going to use examples to answer that question. And then once we have those examples in mind, we can zoom out and ask the more kind of abstract question, what is trust? So our first example is the situation of a trust fall. I don't know if you know what a trust fall is, but the basic idea is that you hold your body stiff, you hold your arms out on either side of your body, so your body makes the shape of a T, and then you fall backwards. Your partner then is supposed to catch you and stop you from hitting the ground. So our key question here is, what type of person would you want to do a trust fall with? And the thing that immediately comes to mind is, of course, their character. Are they a good person? Are they going to be the type of person that thinks it's funny if I get hurt? Are they going to rejoice in my pain? Or are they going to try to prevent me from having pain? The idea is, are they good enough to want to catch me? But that's not the whole picture. Character is the first thing that comes to mind, but someone is only trustworthy if they are also capable enough to catch you. Now, this isn't as intuitive as the question of character, because sometimes we might tend to think, all I'm really trusting them to do is to try to catch me. If they do their best and I still hit the ground and get hurt, that's not really their fault. I wouldn't hold that against them or feel betrayed. I mean, it'd suck, but, it's not on them. I think that misses the point just a little bit. We're not asking, who would you trust to try to catch you? We're asking, who would you trust to actually catch you? And if someone's going to actually catch you, they need both to be good enough to try to catch you, and then they also have to be capable enough to know when you're falling, to know where you're falling. They need to be strong enough to catch you, and they also can't get distracted. I don't know if you've seen, but there's this really sad video on the internet where this dad, for some reason, really wants to do a trust fall with his daughter. And she's reluctant, but he wants her to do it, and so they get all set up. And then, just as his daughter starts falling backwards, one of his other children walks into the room and starts talking to him behind him. And so he turns around to talk to that other child right as his daughter falls. And of course, she hits the ground and it's painful and she starts crying and she feels very betrayed by her father, right? So when it comes to this question of capability, we're really kind of asking, are they in control of the situation? Or at least, are they in control enough? And they can't get distracted. They need to know certain things. And then they also have to have a certain level of strength. To step briefly aside, I think this trust fall situation helps us understand why it's even worthwhile to ask the question about whether God is trustworthy. Because life hurts a lot, because God just doesn't catch us like we want him to, it's often really hard to trust him. So this means we have a relational problem. And this relational problem is encapsulated in the question, God, if you're good and you're in control, why do I hurt? And closely related to this relational problem is an intellectual problem. Is it really rational to believe that a God who is good and in control exists? This is what philosophers call the problem of evil. It's often hard to see how God's goodness, God's control, and our pain can all fit in the same picture. And the reality of our pain is obvious. We can't really doubt that. So then we're thinking, well, maybe God's not good, or maybe God's not in control, or maybe no God even exists. So by exploring whether God is trustworthy, we can help address these problems. And the next step in that exploration is to talk about spies. Let's say that John and Sarah are spies, and their countries are at war with each other. John's country is at war with Sarah's, and Sarah's is at war with John's. Now, John and Sarah aren't just normal spies. They're really good spies, kind of like James Bond here. But unlike Bond, who's actually a really horrible person, John and Sarah are morally upright. As a matter of fact, the whole reason that John and Sarah became spies is that each of them felt that it was their moral duty to help their country in this war, and they thought that being a spy was the best way to do that. So spying is kind of a shady profession, but it just so happens that both John and Sarah did it out of a sense of moral duty. But remember, even though John and Sarah are both good people, their countries are at war. So the question is, can John and Sarah trust each other? And the answer is pretty obviously no. They're spies for countries that are at war. But this means that we're in kind of a confusing situation. After all, in our example that we just had about the trust fall, it was someone's character and their capabilities that made them trustworthy. And we've just said both John and Sarah are of good character, and they're both really capable people. They don't lack character, they don't lack capability, so why can't they trust each other? Well, and it's actually kind of even worse than that, because remember, John and Sarah became spies precisely because they felt it was their duty. Their character is the reason that they can't trust each other. It's the reason that they're trying to deceive and get the better of each other. And actually, the more capable they are, the more effectively they'll be able to deceive and trick each other. So it's not just that John and Sarah can't trust each other in spite of the fact that they're capable and have good character. John and Sarah can't trust each other precisely because they have good character and are capable. So what is happening here? I think John and Sarah can't trust each other because they lack something called commonality. They're just not working towards the same goals. They're not on the same team. And you see this all the time in much more kind of normal situations. Take the Super Bowl that's going to be happening in a few hours. At some point in the game, the Chiefs are probably going to try to trick the Buccaneers about who has the ball. They're going to try to make it look like person A has the ball when really person B has the ball. And the more capable the Chiefs are, the more effective their deception will be. So the Buccaneers just can't trust the Chiefs. But that's not because the Chiefs are bad football players or bad people. It's just because they're not on the same team. So our two examples show us that there are three things involved in trustworthiness: character, capability, and commonality. These correspond to three questions. Is this person good? Is this person sufficiently in control of the situation? And are we on the same team? Now, the thing that's just a little bit confusing is that as we go through life, we usually don't really think about the commonality bit. If we decide someone has good character, we've pretty much already decided that they share our values, that we're on the same moral team. If we thought they were on a different moral team, we usually wouldn't think that they have good character. So the commonality question is kind of already bound up in the character question. Once we answer the character question, the answer to the commonality question is usually assumed. So when it comes to talking about trust, we're going to focus on character and capability. We're going to focus on the trust fall situation. And we're only going to look at commonality and talk about spies in particular situations where it's particularly relevant. Character and capability are the key factors. So now that we know when we should trust someone when they have good character and when they are capable. The next step in understanding trust is to ask, how do we come to trust? What's the process that happens? And there are kind of two basic ways. The first one is what I like to call the brothers in arms situation. People who are in combat together often have a strong bond of trust. Why is that? Well, they've seen each other's character and capabilities in times of crisis. Each of them has risked their life to save the life of their comrades, and their comrades have done the same for them. This demonstrates their character. They've placed their lives in the hands of their comrades, and their comrades have been capable enough to ensure that they survived. So one way to trust someone, one way to come to trust another person, is through a time of crisis that often in a very short period of time gives us a clear picture of who another person is, reveals their character and their capabilities, sometimes in an instant. Now, the other way of coming to trust someone is really much more mundane, and I like to call it the mother and baby situation. Now, the most important thing from this slide is just to appreciate the fact that this little girl is adorable. I think you could probably measure gravity by looking at which way her cheeks are pointing. But when it comes to trust, the point is that when a home is functioning and healthy, a child like this little girl never has to wonder whether her parents are trustworthy. Trust in her parents is kind of like the air she breathes. She probably doesn't even realize that it exists until she's, at least 10, 11, 12, maybe a teenager. So this shows that we often come to trust people through a bunch of little things that we might not even be consciously aware of. These little things tell us about other people's character and capabilities, and we come into contact with these little things through just spending enough time with them to get to know them. So at this point, we've seen that we should trust someone when they're capable and of good character, and we learn about these factors, these things, by just getting to know someone, sometimes through everyday interaction and sometimes through a time of crisis. Now, we are finally ready to ask, what is trust? Now, we got a little bit ahead of ourselves there. Hope no one saw. Trying to brainwash you by quickly showing you a slide. No. Let's come back to our trust fall example. And this trust fall example shows us that there are two parts of trust. Part of trust is a state of mind, and part of trust is a choice. Part of it is what we believe, and part of it is what we do. And so far, we've talked a lot about the state of mind part. Do I believe that someone is good? Do I believe that someone is in control of the situation? But the choice part we haven't talked about as much, and it's a little bit more fuzzy. And at first, someone might think, well, we don't really have a choice in trust. After all, if I'm suspicious of someone, I usually can't just choose to trust them. Now, because of a situation, I might need to act as if I trust them, but that doesn't mean that I actually trust them. But I think we do have a choice when it comes to trust. So I might not be able to make myself trust someone who I'm already suspicious of, and I might not be able to make myself suspicious of someone who I already trust. But there are lots of times when maybe I'm feeling kind of neutral towards someone, and then I can choose to become trusting, or choose to become suspicious. Or there are times when I can choose to stay neutral and suspend judgment when I would otherwise be inclined to become trusting or suspicious. So take two examples. There's lots of situations where we're hurt and we feel betrayed and we start to feel really kind of suspicious of another person. That's our instinct. But then we can check ourselves and we can say, you know what? I don't really know if that's fair. I think there's probably a misunderstanding. Maybe there was just a miscommunication. I should really give this person the benefit of the doubt. So that's a situation where we're inclined to become suspicious, and then we can hold ourselves back and stay neutral. Or often in romantic situations, we find ourselves really inclined to be super trusting. We feel very safe, very confident in the other person. But then we can check ourselves and we can say, you know what, do I really know this person that well? Are these feelings really justified? So there, I'm inclined to be really trusting, but I can choose to hold myself back and be a little bit more cautious. So in the context of relationship, we can make choices about whether we become trusting or suspicious. Now, that's within the context of relationship. But another way that our choices influence trust is simply through who we enter into relationship with. If we hold ourselves back from relationship with a person, never really getting to know them, we just won't develop trust. It's only by choosing to spend time with them and to get to know them, and ultimately giving them opportunities to let us down, usually in small ways initially, that we can come to fully trust another person. So I think the basic idea is that we can't turn trust on and off like a light switch, but we can nurture it or starve it. Now, because there's these two parts of trust, the state of mind, what we believe, and our choices, what we do, there can be a mismatch. Sometimes we find ourselves trusting someone we really know we shouldn't, but we still can't stop trusting them. Other times we know we're unfairly suspicious. We find ourselves being suspicious and distrusting of someone, and we know they don't deserve it. So this mismatch can happen. But ideally, when everything is going good and pretty normal, our choice to trust and our belief that someone is trustworthy go hand in hand. Now, after all of that lead up, and staring at these two stick figures and wondering whether or not the stick figure on the left actually catches the stick figure on the right, we are finally ready to answer the question, what is trust? It was a lot of suspense, but we made it. I'd like to suggest that trust is a volitional inference that bridges a gap that would otherwise exist between evidence and belief. So when I say it's an inference, I mean it's a way of thinking, a way of reasoning. And when I say it's volitional, I just mean that we have a choice about that way of thinking or reasoning. And that choice is what we spent the past few minutes talking about and trying to understand. As for the rest of the definition, I think we should look at an example. So, if I'm going to do a trust fall with someone, and I trust them to catch me, that means I believe they will catch me. Let's also say that that's a true belief. They will in fact catch me. But how do I know that? I don't know the future. I can't see, hear, or feel them catch me. No one else can see, hear, or feel them catch me. I can't read about it in a book. It hasn't happened yet. So there's a gap between the present and the future, and that means that there's a gap between my evidence that I have in the present and my belief about the future, that they will catch me. So trust can bridge that gap from my belief that my partner is capable and good to my belief that my partner will catch me. Now, this isn't an infallible process. I could be wrong, but it is a legitimate way of forming beliefs. Here's another example. I don't have direct evidence of the fact that the Earth goes around the sun, rather than vice versa. If I was just going about my ordinary life based on what I can see with my eyes, I would think that the sun goes around the Earth. And actually, people thought that for thousands of years, right? So there's a gap between the evidence that I personally have and my belief. How did I bridge that gap? Well, I read science textbooks in elementary school, and I trusted what those people said. Now, one kind of key question is this connection between evidence and belief legitimate? Does it involve kind of like wishful thinking, or is it are we working too hard to get from evidence to belief when we trust? And I would say no. I would say that trust actually bridges this gap. You actually can walk across this bridge. You don't have to make a leap of faith, so to speak. Trust actually does connect evidence and belief in a legitimate manner. Now, of course, you can make mistakes in trust, but you can also make mistakes in math. Still, it's pretty obvious trust is more risky and less certain than, say, arithmetic. Trust isn't as sure as 2 plus 2 equals 4. But trust is also more useful than math. All math can do is tell us about the relationships between numbers. But we can use trust to learn about all sorts of things, whether it be the truth about God, the truth about whether the earth goes around the sun, or the truth about how many freckles someone has on their left thumb. I think the situation's kind of like this. Walking across a bridge is more risky than walking on normal land, no question. But normal land won't get you across a river. Sometimes you need a bridge. In the same way, using trust to form beliefs is less certain than some other ways of forming beliefs. But there are beliefs that are in fact true, that you can only get to by using trust. That was a lot of words. Let's recap. In this video, we asked 2 questions. What is trust, and when should we do it? We saw that trust is a volitional inference that bridges a gap that would otherwise exist between evidence and belief. When we say trust is a volitional inference, we mean that it's a way of thinking, and we have a choice about that way of thinking. Our evidence comes from getting to know other people, whether that's in everyday life, like a mother and child, or in a time of crisis, like brothers in arms. And by getting to know someone, we have evidence about their character and capability. Trust allows us to move from this evidence to beliefs about all sorts of things, including some things that we wouldn't be able to know in any other way.